Have you ever trusted someone just because they wore a badge? Sometimes the biggest danger isn't the person breaking the rules. It's the one pretending to enforce them. What happened to my family started with an HOA security volunteer who wanted everyone to believe he was a police officer. It ended with flashing lights, criminal charges, and a truth that shocked the entire neighborhood. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notification for more HOA stories every week. My name is Daniel Brooks. I'm 42 years old, a former U.S. Army logistics officer, and now I own a construction company in Texas. My wife, Emily, teaches elementary school, and our 14-year-old son, Noah, spends most afternoons riding his mountain bike around our neighborhood. We had lived in Cedar Grove Estates for nearly 4 years. The neighborhood was quiet, clean, and mostly friendly. The HOA wasn't perfect, but until recently, it wasn't unbearable either. That changed when a man named Richard Mason joined the HOA board. Richard constantly wore dark tactical clothing, shiny combat boots, and a badge clipped to his belt. He drove a black SUV with flashing amber lights installed on the dashboard. Most new residents assumed he was a police officer. He never directly said he was one, but he never corrected anyone either. Whenever children played outside, Richard would patrol the streets, stopping people to lecture them about HOA rules. He demanded IDs. He questioned delivery drivers. He even carried a holstered handgun everywhere he went. Texas law allowed him to legally carry the firearm, but he had absolutely no law enforcement authority. Unfortunately, many neighbors didn't know the difference. Richard loved acting like he ran the neighborhood. One Saturday afternoon, Noah asked if he could ride his bike to a nearby fishing pond. "Be back before dinner," I said. "No problem, Dad." About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Noah. His voice was shaking. "Dad, can you come?" "What's wrong?" "That HOA guy, Richard." He pulled his gun. For a split second, my heart stopped. I jumped into my truck and drove less than 2 minutes to the pond. When I arrived, I saw Noah standing beside his bike with tears in his eyes. About 20 feet away stood Richard. His hand rested on the grip of his holstered pistol. Several frightened children stood nearby. Parents were beginning to gather. I immediately walked toward Noah. "Are you okay?" He nodded. Then I turned toward Richard. "What happened?" Richard folded his arms. "Your son ignored my orders." "My orders?" "I told him to stop riding. He refused. So I conducted a lawful detention." I stared at him. "You're not a police officer." Richard smiled. "I have neighborhood authority." "No, you have HOA authority. Those are two very different things." He stepped closer. "Your son became aggressive." Noah immediately spoke up. "I never touched him. He just kept yelling." Another child nodded. Mr. Richard grabbed Noah's bike. A mother who had witnessed everything added. Then he reached for his gun. Richard interrupted. "I feared for my safety." The crowd went silent. Feared for his safety from a 14-year-old boy holding a bicycle helmet. I looked directly at him. "Did you point your firearm at my son?" He hesitated. I displayed it. That answer was enough. I pulled out my phone and called 911. Within minutes, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. Richard confidently walked toward them. "Good to see you, officers." He flashed his shiny badge. One deputy looked confused. "What agency are you with?" Richard paused. "I'm HOA security." The deputy frowned. "You're not law enforcement." Richard quietly replied, "No." The deputy immediately asked him to step away from the crowd. Meanwhile, witnesses began giving statements. Parents described Richard yelling at children. Several teenagers confirmed he'd been pretending to stop people for months. One delivery driver even said Richard once threatened to write him a citation. The deputy turned to Richard. "Do you have any police authority?" "No." "Have you identified yourself as law enforcement?" "I never actually said I was." "But you wear a badge." "Yes." "Carry a gun." "Yes." "Stop people." "Yes." The deputy simply wrote everything down. Then he asked to see Richard's identification. Richard reluctantly handed it over. The deputy walked back to his patrol vehicle. About 5 minutes later, everything changed. The deputy returned with a completely different expression. He asked Richard, "Were you ever employed by the police department?" Richard swallowed hard. "No. Were you removed from a private security company last year?" Richard stayed silent. The deputy already had the answer. Several years earlier, Richard had worked for a licensed private security company. He had been fired. His security license had expired. Yet he continued dressing like an officer and intimidating residents. The deputies confiscated his badge for evidence. Then they photographed the tactical gear, fake identification holder, and equipment inside his SUV. Amber emergency-style lights, traffic baton, reflective vest, several items labeled security commander. Neighbors couldn't believe it. Many had genuinely believed Richard was an active police officer. One elderly resident whispered, "I let him inside my house because I thought he was law enforcement." The deputies looked even more concerned. 3 days later, the HOA called an emergency board meeting. The clubhouse was packed. Richard arrived wearing a suit instead of tactical gear. For the first time, there was no badge, no boots, no gun on display. The HOA attorney stood first. He addressed the room. The HOA has no police department. The association never authorized anyone to detain residents. The board does not permit members to identify themselves as law enforcement. Then he looked directly at Richard. "Effective immediately, your position is terminated." The room erupted into applause. Richard quietly gathered his papers and walked out without saying a word. I assumed that was the end. It wasn't. Weeks later, investigators completed their review. Witness statements, security camera footage, neighborhood surveillance videos. Everything painted the same picture. Richard had repeatedly used intimidation to control residents while creating the impression that he possessed police authority. Authorities ultimately filed charges related to impersonating a public servant and other applicable offenses based on the investigation. Civil lawsuits soon followed from several residents who claimed they had been threatened or unlawfully detained. The HOA's insurance company refused to defend Richard because his actions had never been authorized. He was on his own. As for our family, Noah eventually regained his confidence. He still rides his bike every weekend. Only now, he knows something important. Real authority doesn't come from a shiny badge. It comes from honesty, responsibility, and respecting the law. A few months later, Cedar Grove Estates adopted new HOA policies. Board members could no longer wear uniforms resembling law enforcement. Security volunteers were prohibited from carrying badges that could be confused with official police credentials. Every resident received written guidance explaining exactly what HOA representatives could and could not do. The neighborhood became quieter, safer, and far more respectful. Because sometimes, exposing the truth is all it takes to end someone else's abuse of power. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more dramatic HOA stories every week. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.